Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about classroom management, really specifically in early childhood. So we're going to talk about developing and teaching rules to little ones. So the objectives for this content is to really look at guidelines, right? Talking about effective strategies for you when you're teaching behavior expectations to little ones. Really, what would your classroom look like when you're displaying these behavior expectations and rules? Also, looking at what are those strategies that are going to help you mostly when you're working in an early childhood classroom, when you're communicating what's expected of that child. And then lastly, looking at how important it is for us to communicate with families of what's expected. That way there's that home to school connection. Now, we need to first start out by defining what is challenging behavior, because when we're trying to talk about rules and expectations, a lot of times we're looking at, okay, if we have challenging behavior, what does that actually mean? So it's really any persistent behavior that's negative and it adversely affects that child and the students in the classroom with that child. So it's something where we have to have an intervention plan. But before we get to that, we really want to focus on how can we prevent this so we don't have those challenging behaviors in our classrooms. So one of the things we could do just to prevent it is to really look at yourself. How is my classroom laid out, right? What is the design? Think about social, emotional, temporal, thinking about the rules and how the classroom flows and our expectations and when we work with others. And if what you're communicating to the student is clear, do they understand what you mean by be safe or be nice to your friend? What does that look like, right? So these are things that have to be clear to that child based on their age level. Also thinking about when you say things, right, it's consistent and you have follow through and it's predictable, meaning there's schedule in place for that child. So they know what's expected and that routine is in place. Also, going again, what I said earlier about social competency, emotional competency, teaching them developmental skills, self-regulating, being independent, how to work and interact with others, how to communicate their needs and wants will a lot of time prevent those challenging behaviors. Okay, so we're going to start off by talking about the difference between expectations and rules. Okay, we have what we call broad goals when we think about expectations. These are different than what we say rules are. So broad means be safe, be responsible, be ready. But what does that mean to a 2, 3, or 4-year-old, right? So we have to develop rules to go along with these broad goals. So for instance, if we're saying be safe, one of the things we would teach them is that we don't run in the room, or if we're using materials, how to safely use them. And you go through and model that for them, right? And they can understand and it's clearer for them. Also, thinking again with these broad goals, being responsible, that's kind of abstract for young children. They're not going to know what that means. So if you could translate that in their language for what age they are and have picture cues to help you, and you state it to where it's measurable, where you can see if they're actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. And those picture cues are all around the room, that helps. And when you do display them, we always say, look at, is everything at eye level? Does it make sense for that child? So if you have a child who doesn't communicate in your classroom, do you have picture cues to help them? So how do we actually teach these roles? One of the biggest things we can do is role play, right? Involving the children. So during group meeting time, these are things that we can do. We can have little role model sessions of how do we play in the centers with our friends? How do we use the toys when we go outside? So involving them with setting up rules of what being safe looks like, playing with their friends, using materials safely, sharing. You have to role play what that visually looks like and teach it to them. When we review them often and go over them often, that helps to become an expectation. It helps them to kind of embed that in their head. Okay, this is what I need to do. Also, looking at those who may have support plans, right? So those who maybe have disabilities in your class, those are things you should think about. Is it something I need to change so that child might understand it better? So you're supporting each individual child. Also thinking about the feedback you're getting from the parents, feedback also, just seeing what kind of behaviors are going on in your classroom, it's going to give you a lot of feedback. Is it working? And then sharing it with the families, so that way there's that home to school connection.